Rare diseases, are we reaching our goals?
Thank you very much, Susan. And I do want to thank Olivier and Pascal for inviting me to join you today. As Susan mentioned, I retired on February 8th, and I started back in 1970 working with the Indian Health Service in the United States. And so it's been all of a sudden 44 years. And as I was starting my 44th year, I thought, you know, if I go to 45 years, I'm going to want to push it to 50 years. And can you imagine a 50-year-old federal employee, 50 years of federal service working? No. We have the new blood, new ideas, new thoughts. So it was just time, and my wife agreed to it. Actually, she was really pushing me and pulling me for the last 2 or 3 years. So if you see me a little disjointed, that's part of the reason. So Jan, thank you for staying with me for all these years. As has been mentioned by the previous speakers, and thank you very much for some excellent presentations, it really does reflect where we're going with respect to the rare disorders. I'm going to try to move the slides here very, very quickly. A quote that I'd like to start with. Success is to be measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life, really appropriate for me, but by the obstacles which he has overcome while trying to succeed. And I think this really reflects many of the patient advocacy groups, many of the rare diseases. In some respects, they're unique. In other respects, they're very similar. There are similar pathways that we have to follow, similar directions that we need to bring the parties together. So it's sort of what we've been looking at for rare disease, and I won't go through all of this because you've heard a great deal of it, but in the United States, there's between 18 and 25 million people with one of the numerous rare diseases. I wish we had good prevalence data. I wish we knew exactly how many patients had a rare disease, and I'll have a slide on this a little bit later if I can keep moving fast enough on this. So approximately 68% have a rare disease, and in fact, our information center that we sponsor, we've had as many as 12, 13% of inquiries coming in per month, and that's about 200,000 inquiries, 200,000 visits per month coming into the information center, trying to find information on undiagnosed rare disorders. So it's a major, major issue. We have a little bit of a difference in prevalence figures in the United States. It's strictly less than 200,000 people, and that has not changed since about 1984, 85. In fact, when we initiated the Orphan Drug Act in 1983, we did not have that prevalence figure. It was just that the company or a sponsor would have to show that it could not make a profit. But that presented data from all over the place, and so we asked Congress to come back and give us a prevalence figure, which is, in those days, we had very, very good luck working with the Congress. Today's a different day. Marshall Summers here. You can talk about that, Mark, but I can too. So it's okay. Wow. So I tried to provide a little bit of a slide that really reflected the many partnerships that are required for success in rare diseases, and it's collaborative partnerships, and you've heard them talking, the speakers talking about this before. And actually, I put an ad on, is this a space for the BLACKSWAN Foundation? Is this a space for URORDIS, Genetic Alliance, NORD? What are the roles? How are we defining these roles? There are so many opportunities and so many partners that it's regardless if you're a small drug company, if you're a large pharmaceutical company, a biotech company, or what. You're going to need many of these partners collaborating with you if you're going to have success. And I didn't mean to put reimbursement down here in the lower corner to reflect anything else but a serious need to work with the reimbursement agency almost as soon as you start thinking that it looks like an approval is going to be forthcoming, if not even before, to talk with them. Certainly one of the newer approaches that we're looking at diagnosis are the sequencing centers, and that has so much promise with respect to the diagnosis of rare diseases. But really, it's a partnerships that have to be established, and we have to work together to provide the information to the patients, to the clinicians, coming out from the academic research centers, from the industry-sponsored research, and it really is to enable the true penetration of the market for the products that are forthcoming for the rare disorders. It's really tragic when you hear that patients don't even know about some products that are available for their rare disease, and they've been available for 2 or 3 years. So whatever we can do to facilitate that penetration is definitely really a tremendous help to the patients. And so I tried to fashion this a little bit. Are we meeting our goals? So you can see there, we actually started the Office of Orphan Products Development back in 1983. And you see the approved products were 2, not a large number. The designations were 26. And you can see the growth of where we are at the present time. And even today, there were 37 designations thus far in 2014. And 7 approvals in 2014 coming from our Food and Drug Administration. And I think Jan mentioned the ORDR initiative, and I believe we're up to like 105, 106. And I know when we started that initiative in 2010 and discussing it, people just sort of would not and could not believe that we would actually be able to reach 200 interventions by 2020. But I think we're well on our way. And I think we will reach that, but it requires the partnerships, and I will have some slides later on talking about the involvement of industry, how that has stimulated so much work with respect to the rare diseases. One of the incentives here in the United States is very, very useful, and I'm sure Novartis is able to take care of this and take advantage of it, is the waiver or the request for a waiver from the IND and NDA submission. And that's worth approximately $2 million for that submission. So to have those fees waived can be quite substantial, both for large and smaller pharmaceutical companies. The Pharmaceutical Research Manufacturers of America, and they have released a report last year and reflected about 450 compounds were in different stages of development. So it's a tremendous push by the pharmaceutical industry. An interesting group to pay attention to for all of us is PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute, which is a quasi-government organization. They have developed the clinical data research networks and patient-powered research networks. So you can see that this whole growth of the patient organizations working together with the clinicians, and now we're seeing more and more with the industry. So quite rewarding. If you were to look at clinicaltrials.gov, you'll find that over nearly 1,500 rare diseases are included in the total number of diseases in the 161,000 or so studies that are included in clinicaltrials.gov. We had the good fortune at NIH, or we had the good fortune that John Gallen, who's the director, reported that over 500 diseases are being studied at the Clinical Center Hospital, and that has always been a true leader as far as rare diseases research. There are over 860 protocols that are utilizing patients with rare disorders. We have finally been able to identify the rare disease research. We started on this several years ago to look at how much research is actually going on at the NIH. As you know, it's comprised of about 27 institutes, 17 of which are research-based institutes. And so it's not a small project when you try to determine what is the level of activity. And in the last couple of years, we've found over $3.6 billion for research for the rare disorders, for 9,400 research projects. And included in that was about $809 million for research projects for orphan drugs. So it's a tremendous amount of information and resources that are available. Some of our activities while I was at the Office of Rare Diseases Research, including the establishment of the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, and I have a slide on this coming up. And Dr. Marshall Summer will be discussing this on Thursday, his success and their success with the Urea Cycle Disorder Consortium. We've had a major emphasis on scientific conferences, really as a mechanism to bring parties together to talk about what is the research agenda, what are the gaps, what are the opportunities that we need to take part. And I would say next to our research network, the scientific conference program that we've had sponsorship with the institutes and centers, with patient advocacy groups, with the industry, with FDA. Over the years since 1995 have been unbelievably rewarding. We see a tremendous growth in participation, and even having a meeting like this in 1983 or 85 or 90, 95, we never would have had the turnout that we have tonight. So thank you very much for all of you committing to what you're doing towards rare diseases. We still have a major gap, and we're working on this with our Office of Dietary Supplements to look at evidence-based research of nutritional dietary supplements for inborn errors of metabolism. Just a tremendous lack of information. We've also started working on a project to try to develop reliable information on the prevalence of rare diseases. Just a link to our Rare Disease Information Center that I mentioned before. A group of genetic counselors support this and work with us on this quite a bit, and it's a tremendous effort. This is the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, and I'll only talk about this briefly, but you can see all the acronyms there for the government, all the various institutes that we work with to develop this research network. And the idea being that when we started this in 2002, 2003, we wanted to develop an infrastructure that we really could bring a critical mass of investigators together from around the United States, and as it's evolving and has evolved from around the world, along with a critical mass of patients working with a patient advocacy group. So part of the requirement is that we have a very strong participation of patient advocacy groups. I just want to bring two particular groups. If you look at the numbers coming out of Peter Merkel at the University of Pennsylvania's vasculitis, his numbers in recruiting are off the board because he's had such an active participation in the patient advocacy groups. Marshall will be talking about the urea cycle disorder coming up here at this meeting. And then Matthias Kretzler, what he's done with the nephrotic syndromes out of University of Michigan, collaborating with folks throughout the world, and particularly here in Europe. So we are really, really pleased with what's going on, and everyone is sort of sitting on the edge of their seats back there in the United States as the folks are waiting for the review, the results of the review that are taking place very soon. Marshall, don't jump up at me yet. Anybody's a researcher and waiting for the results of the review process, but they're coming very shortly. Again, as I mentioned, a major component has been working with the patient advocacy groups. It's a large emphasis on training the next generation of researchers. We have a tremendous emphasis on the natural history and pilot clinical studies, just to try to develop some baseline information. But we really are hopeful that we are continuing to expand that information for the rare disorders. And you can see here some of the international sites that we have the capability of expanding the research network. It's not as difficult and onerous as what most people would think, that we've had the investigators working very closely with the investigators throughout the world. And we think this time, as a competition goes through, we'll have even a greater representation from other parts of the globe. So you can see a number of partners here in Europe particularly. We have about 15 countries, including the United States, that we are recruiting from and participating. So when people say you can't really get patients for rare diseases, I think there are a number of factors that you have to look at. We've been very, very successful. I'd say of the 126 studies or so that we've activated, maybe 3 or 4, we haven't been able to really reach our goals. The tremendous boost from the patient advocacy groups and, of course, the arrival of the internet and information coming to the patients, and social media has really boosted the participation in these various studies that we have. And again, we talked about the trainees and the patient advocacy group, so I won't spend too much time, and Marshall probably will have more information on that coming. I want to give a couple of examples of what we've done, and this is one from our scientific conferences program. In 2003, when we had our first go-round of the Rare Disease Clinical Research Network, we had several groups come in with the lysosomal storage disorders. And of course, the review group, when they saw this, said, you know, you really don't have your whole act together. You need to sit down and talk about how you're going to put things together. And so we working with the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke and our office, and several of the other institutes, we said, look, we will sponsor workshops. We will provide an emphasis on lysosomal storage disorders. And so now, into almost their 10th year, I believe they had close to 1,000 research investigators present just for their World Congress that they had, the World Symposium. And it is amazing what has happened and the emphasis on the lysosomal storage diseases. So it's an example of success out of failure, where the groups were not successful at all. in gaining a grant, but what they've done to facilitate the growth and emphasis on this group of disorders has been nothing short of phenomenal. So tremendous. Another example from the work done by Bill Young and his group through the brain vascular malformation, in which they discovered a mutation for Sturge-Weber syndrome. And I know for years we were criticized for talking about obtaining a diagnosis, why it was so important to obtain a diagnosis and get that diagnosis out to the patients and the families, even if there was no intervention available. And I still hear this from a number of physicians who say, you know, do we really want to get that diagnosis if there's nothing that can be done? And I will tell you just one example right here, the relief this brought to the families when they realized that it was a mutation that was occurring and it wasn't a direct inheritance. You cannot describe that relief. And we're seeing this more and more. And again, I think we've always felt too that the patient's right and need to know was so critical for them to obtain information and mostly to obtain that support of working together. And we also think that the physicians benefit from that close collaboration of patients with patients and sharing of information with the clinicians. And you've heard some references to contact registries, patient registries, and a tremendous amount of work going on. Here is one from our North American Mitochondrial Disease Consortia. And you can see two major activities that took place. Here, we're coming along, recruiting some patients onto the contact registry. They did an email blast with the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation. You can see the spike up. I mean, to get 300 and some patients in a couple of months in a rare disease area is really amazing, and they were able to do it. The Muscular Dystrophy Association then published another article, and you can see this following spike again of 70 additional patients. And these become the patients for the clinical studies that we have in the research network. And so that's why you see a lot of emphasis on the patient registries, contact registries, research match, and other initiatives such as this. Some of the game changers that we have seen that really have increased the emphasis on rare diseases and orphan products. I would say that the partnerships that have been developed among the patients, the families, the foundation, the government research and regulatory scientists, the industry and academic researchers has been truly, truly outstanding. And I don't think anyone ever could have predicted that we were going to reach this level of success of having people work together in a collaborative way, of teaching each other about the disease and teaching each other what is necessary and the difficulties of research, the difficulties of bringing a product to the marketplace. It has been amazing, and I think one of the outstanding outcomes of all these collaborations are the folks working together, the whole community coming together and focusing on rare disorders. Certainly, and Jan discussed this, the expanded role of the patient advocacy groups as research partners, and actually it's the acceptance of patients and the patient advocacy group as research partners. How we ever got along without the patients being partners, I think you can see the difficulties we had in conducting clinical research and the inability to recruit patients for clinical studies. And now, if you have an active patient advocacy group, you're going to make a tremendous amount of progress, and very, very quickly. David addressed that too, and it happens so much more quickly. Certainly, internet access to information has generated so much information and made communication so much easier. Some information not so good, but most of the information is really, really pretty useful. I think also all the publicity about genetic testing, gene therapy, stem cell, personalized medicine has generated, again, a lot of information about rare diseases. Another game changer has been the globalization of the industry, the patient advocacy groups, and the research investigators, where everyone is working together and collaborating. And I think the globalization and the reorganization of much of the industry has now seems to have settled down. Dr. Reiner, you can talk about this a little bit, but I just see this growth and emphasis on the rare diseases coming with respect from the industry's participation. So we now have some interesting business models for why it's useful to develop rare diseases with the academics and the smaller industry members. We've had at our own clinical center the Undiagnosed Diseases program that we initiated in 2009 has been so overwhelming. The people have agreed there at NIH to provide support for additional sites and a data coordinating center. So there will be an announcement coming this spring about these new centers that have an emphasis on undiagnosed diseases. And actually they, a couple of other individual institutions have initiated this whole, their programs totally separate from funding from the NIH, and that is good to see. And again, a big part of this will be the training of the younger physicians, younger investigators, to have them understand the whole genome sequencing, all the results of what we're looking at. Certainly, we're looking to expand international interest in undiagnosed diseases. There's been a great interest in NIH at the translational research activities, and I'll have a slide if I have enough time to get into that in just a few minutes. So, and we talked briefly also about genomic-based medicine with a better classification of diseases and diagnosis with the stratification of patients based on a molecular basis to link up with the phenotypic expression. And certainly what is coming with respect to the genome sequencing, exome sequencing, next generation sequencing, the capabilities to improve diagnosis. Just want to briefly talk about the value of patient registries, and it's a little distorted, as you can see, because a lot of this we have a pretty good feel for. It's getting those patients, getting in contact with the patients, working with them, obtaining sufficient biospecimens from patients that link up the clinical information with the specimen that can follow along. A tremendous emphasis now on natural history studies, trying to identify clinical endpoints much earlier, and also to identify off-label uses to be studied and to investigate it even further. So in essence, what we're seeing from the FDA, many of the studies, many of the products that come through the FDA, you're ending up with phase 4 post-approval studies being required. And in essence, you get back to where you start with the patients and the family. So we think this is a good place to start. As soon as you have more than 2 or 3 patients in an organization or starting it, you should look to develop a registry. I talked about prevalence of rare diseases, and you can see there's some of really the needs of what we're trying to do, so we can give everyone a better idea. The cost-benefit analysis of potential products we think would be very, would benefit from having better estimates of the prevalence of rare diseases. We'd like to look at perhaps some comparative effectiveness data of interventions and outcomes. And we're seeing this more and more as you see some diseases having 6 or 7 different products that are being studied simultaneously. We'd like to look at the studies on the burden of disease, really to give a better assessment. Certainly, we really need to have a better assessment of the morbidity and mortality for these diseases so we can make our arguments why they should be covered for reimbursement, why it is important to continue the research for the rare diseases. I just briefly want to talk on some of the major programs at the NIH. You've heard of NCATS, the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences, the TREND program, the Bridges program. The Cancer Institute, as many of you know, have had a NEXT program for many years to assist in with activities related to the development. A relatively newer organization from the Neurological Disorders and Stroke group called NeuroNext, and it's a group of about 23, 24 different organizations who come together, and they focus on being able to drop a product into this network of researchers throughout the United States and conduct a study very quickly. Some of you are familiar with the small SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research. And when you get 3.25%, it doesn't look like a lot, but you start multiplying that out close to $30 billion. All of a sudden, it's a great deal of money that's available. And I'm getting the red flash here, so I will move these things through quickly. Allergy, infectious diseases, including immunology. Again, a lot of resources that are available. The heart, lung, and blood, you have centers for accelerate innovation. Again, the major idea and a point I'd like to make here is that there are a lot of resources available to fill in those gaps. and so important to work with the program people to understand the programs and what's available. Some of the regulatory approaches, and this will be very quickly, most of you are probably run into this. We've talked about now priority review vouchers coming for rare pediatric and tropical diseases, repurposed drugs coming along, much greater discussion, certain incentives for antibiotics. I think one of the more important things from the perspective of the rare diseases community is using the experts for consultation to have them be available to join in this discussion at FDA, to talk about the severity of diseases, the unmet medical needs associated with rare diseases, no treatments, what are we going to do, how are we going to treat these patients. And I think for so many people, they really forget about the willingness and the ability and the desire of individuals with rare disease to participate in clinical trials. So important. I think it's also an opportunity to talk with them about the relative risk and risk assessment and risk acceptance on the part of the patients and the families if there are no other treatments available. So major initiatives. And here are some things too, and I won't go through these, but the slides will be available where we can talk about fast-track breakthrough therapy, accelerated approval, and priority review. All major changes at the Food and Drug Administration in the last several years to try to speed up the development of the products. So the challenges, and I won't go through too many of these, we've talked about all of these, but I think more and more as we get into the understanding of the genetic differences, we're going to be looking at these master protocol clinical trial designs that we have multiple arms getting started, changing the protocol here and there, but adding in different interventions at different times based on the success. So I think this is something we need to look at for the rare disorders. Certainly there a lot of emphasis on study design for small patient population. We'd like to see a better harmonization of research data for regulatory purposes. I think most of the folks here who have any involvement with the industry would go along with this idea. One of our major concerns is the transitional care from pediatric to adults, a major gap for many of the rare disorders. And what is starting to come through more and more now, the cost of the orphan drugs, reaching the tipping point on the reimbursement. When will that occur, and how will all this be helped? So the optimism, and I think Jan mentioned this too, the various types of therapy that are coming down in the pipeline, and the diagnostic capabilities. I don't ever recall having a period of time that this is growing so much, and there's so much enthusiasm, so many opportunities. Now we have to find the funds to do this. So are we reaching our goals? Yes. But we need to do it much better. We need to do, as we say, better than our best efforts. We need to develop products more quickly. The patients can't wait, and the diseases don't wait for our treatments and our interventions. And we really do have to define more efficient approaches and less costly approaches to developing the products. So we are meeting those goals. Little glitch here, so I'll move this forward, sorry. So I'll end up with a quote from William Faulkner. And this sort of speaks a little bit to what we've run into the rare disease community. We're actually running into this more and more. Always dream and shoot higher than you know you can do. Don't bother just to be better than your contemporaries or predecessors. Try to be better than yourself. And if we do that every day, we will find tremendous successes and unknown rewards coming to the patients, the clinicians, the researchers, the industry, and the entire rare diseases community. So thank you for your attention, and most importantly, the continued commitment to the rare diseases research and orphan product development. So thank you very much.